I don't know what the Clintons are going to do. I actually have already said, and I maintain what? Well, we care if they come back out. But I've already said that I actually think Hillary Clinton made a mistake because she said in the campaign, and we've already talked about this to a overabundant degree, didn't make it about policy, didn't make it about a structural threat of republicanism, made it about Donald Trump, uniquely disgusting, uniquely incapable, uniquely unstable. By the way, that's all true. I actually like that little summation. Uniquely disgusting, uniquely incapable, uniquely unstable. But as soon as she lost, she came out and she gave the typical spiel about, respect the election results, blah, 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 and then she disappeared from public view. Now, that's completely antithetical to the campaign she ran. If she believed what she said in the campaign, she would be out every day being like, look, I might support the constitutional order here, but this guy is a clear and present danger, and I'm going to stay as a public spokesperson on him. She's chosen not to do that. That's fine. And the Clintons have sort of folded up tent. But they still represent an incredibly potent force of third-way politics, and it's potent for a couple of reasons. One, because it's the way that so-called center-left parties were able to synchronize very easily with capital and campaign contributions in the 90s. There's a perception of a record of success, although the environment for political success for Bill Clinton was radically different than it is today. But Bill Clinton's and Hillary Clinton's ideological soulmate across the pond in the UK, my favorite modern politician, Tony Blair. And the thing is, I sort of mean that. I have a troubling soft spot for Tony Blair because he just couldn't be more shameless. It's almost charming. But he spent the last decade or so since leaving office, which he left after, of course, immense controversy because of his commitment to the distorting intelligence and to invading Iraq with George Bush at all costs. And then, of course, he left in 2007, but in 2008, the global economy imploded, and that was actually another aspect of his light touch regulation policy. He actually also did introduce a minimum wage and push a lot of investment in the NHS and welfare programs in the UK. And he is out as literally an embodiment of the failure of modern Western politics in many respects. Someone who, through their mendacity, cynicism, and obsession with spin, has certainly created somewhat of the context for a flourishing of the dangerous proto-fascist right that we're seeing today. And he thinks that he has the answer to this, which is that he's going to close up his shop from advising the Saudis and providing PR advice to Central Asian dictators and facilitating deals in Kuwait and getting paid obscene amounts of money by various sovereign wealth funds. He's going to step back from that business and get back into the business of good, important centrist politics. He's talking with Judy Woodruff on PBS. Let's take a look at this, and we'll explain all the things, unfortunately, that he's still getting wrong.
What it means is, as you can see from here and from Europe at the moment, from Britain, there's a huge wave of anti-establishment feeling. There's an enormous amount of anger. It's collapsing governments and political movements across the world right now. And my view is that we're entering into a situation of enormous instability, insecurity, fragility, and because I happen to believe that the best policy solutions lie in the center ground, then I want to see how does the center revitalize itself, how does it develop the policy agenda for the future, and how do we link up people who have the same basic ideas and attachments to the same basic values across the world.
So are you talking about creating new political parties in the middle?
No, it's really about linking up people who look at what's happening in the world, know that the world needs change, and not the status quo, don't want the center to be a place where we're just managing the status quo, but instead where we're really articulating change and developing the policy agenda that's going to allow us to address the concerns of people left behind by globalization, communities that are fragmented, and allows us also to address it in a way which provides answers and not just anger.
And I mean, what we see in the United States is both political parties pretty fiercely, jealously guard their own territory. I mean, the Republicans don't want to give up any ground. The Democrats don't want to give up any ground. Is there really room left for something in the middle?
Well, there's a necessity, I think, because the trouble with today's politics, and it's exactly the same on the other side of the Atlantic, is that people, and this is partly as a result, I think, of social media interacting with conventional media, and people divide into groups where they talk to each other but don't talk across the divide. And yet most of the challenges we face in the world today, challenges that are to do with trade, with technology, with how you make sure that people are properly educated, reform your healthcare system, these are challenges that we all share in common, and they require practical solutions. I mean, they may be radical, indeed, in many circumstances should be, but they need to be practical, evidence-based, and capable of not just exploiting people's anger or riding their anger, but saying, look, this is something that's going to improve your life.
Okay, let's work this backwards. First of all, he talks about being in bubbles. This is a guy, and it doesn't really have to do just with him personally, but you hear this a lot in very rarefied discourse, that we're in these ideological bubbles. This is a guy who spends his entire life practically in a series of multi-million-dollar homes, jetting across the world in a combination of private consultancy fees and government largesse, which he still gets as an ex-prime minister of the UK. He spends time around plutocrats, heads of state, people from the entertainment industry, and he's talking about bubbles. Be very aware of what an actual bubble is. Now, then he talks about change. Ironically, the mantra of people like Clinton Blair and third way politics was constantly change. It was a repetitive sort of brand positioning of that politics. And change usually meant, here is another thing that my base constituency needs to submit to meet the rigors of globalization. They created a simple equation. On the right, it's what we already know. Have trade agreements, eliminate social protections, you sink or swim, it's on you, screw you. Hopefully we'll kind of organically recreate some type of neo-feudal system. The third way answer was, we're going to pretty much give the corporations what they want. We'll have light touch regulation. We'll have trade agreements written to benefit industries, whether it's pharma, finance, petro, whatever. But we are going to redistribute a little bit of it, and we will create a roadmap for meritocracy so that if somebody tests well and has a lot of breaks, they can work their way up the economic ladder. But the conversation of just lifting the overall base, we're going to de-emphasize that. It was this notion of equality of opportunity, not outcomes, which sounds great on paper, but it's kind of meaningless because you, of course, can't, and no one wants, even the most Marxists, to have equal outcomes because that's literally impossible. But this notion that a poor person with no access to actual capital or social capital in a failing school with limited social networks and opportunity can somehow be, whether it's just through investment in the school or some other type of minor intervention, could all of a sudden have an equal opportunity set as a wealthy person is delusional. There's no intellectual rigor behind this. Number 3, he talks about people being left behind by globalization. Well, you were being shouted at in real time about the people left behind by globalization. And the response was, again, maybe here's some training programs, or maybe you should be left behind because you're not smart enough to compete in the global economy. And then finally, this terminology of what center ground is means nothing And in fact, it needs to start to be rebranded. As many people pointed this out before. On economic positions, Bernie Sanders, as an example, is in the 70s. Don't cut Social Security, expand it. Don't touch Medicare or Medicaid. Then there's going to be some other issues where you need to expand and redefine the center ground and not play to it. The irony of so-called centrist politics was that there was an enormous willingness to pursue deeply unpopular policies if it was beneficial to the top end, to donors, to corporations. And then there was a lot of willingness under Clinton and Blair. There's been significant improvement under Obama, though he still is a third-way Democrat. But certainly under Clinton and Blair, they were very willing to appeal to that so-called center with right-wing populism themselves of a certain variety. So take that clip as a sort of snapshot in time of, ironically, a complete stuck thought process, which is totally bubble-contained and has no answers for the future, but it's a history that's worth knowing. Final point, Judy Woodruff is stuck in that same time capsule. Those questions could have come from like 1995.
Hey, it's Sam Seder. Why don't you subscribe to this channel? You can do so right over here. Subscribe.